So I'd like to talk a little more now and pick up the theme and so take it further. This is a slightly bigger chunk of teachings. I'll probably talk for just under an hour, I imagine. So it's probably important to be relatively comfortable and still to be awake as possible. Okay. So, we were talking earlier about all the using these words image and fantasy in a way that the best I can find right now, but the many possibilities, possible ways that they might manifest, express themselves, be sensible in our lives and in our meditations. It usually, in this kind of culture, first of all in this society, and secondly in this kind of meditation culture, insight meditation, we're not usually even aware of what fantasies are running through our life. I don't mean just the sort of flotsam and jetsam of daydreams and nonsense. I mean the deeper currents of fantasy. We're not usually aware. We don't usually think that way. We don't usually feel the life of that and how central it is actually to our whole sense of existence and where we're going and what we're doing and even what we're doing in practice. So we're not usually aware of the fantasies that are in our lives and the fantasies that are in our practice as part of practice. It's a good part of practice. And when it comes to actually images that arise for us as objects, this image or that image or others in the mind or whatever, it's interesting to sort of survey a little bit what the typical responses or attitudes are in, say, the insight meditation tradition, for example, or a little bit wider. Very often, we're just kind of given the message, ignore them. They have no value, they're kind of meaningless, and just ignore them. It's just daydreaming, it's just nonsense. And so that's very often what we're told, and that's very often what we practice, so that we actually become better and better at not giving them attention. Or, we might say, yeah, mostly ignore them, but if it's a nice one, or a kind of particularly Buddhist one, then that's okay, you can be with that a little bit. But still, it's not really the real thing, is the sense. Or, you say, not so much ignore them, but notice what it is that arises. But just notice and let it go. It's okay, let it arise, let it pass. And sometimes that can be extended a little bit so that there's a kind of attitude of, you see what's inside of you. You see if something angry or violent or weird or whatever, you see that that's inside of you. And so a little bit, the sense of the self is stretched a little bit so that we don't judge these things in others. So some of you will know that poem by Thich Nhat Hanh, Please Call Me By My True Names. Do you know that? So in a way that's what he's saying. Look at all this stuff that happens, and the snake that eats the frog, and the this and the that. And say, actually, please call me by my true names. I am all of that. So it's nice. It's there's less judgment there when we see that in the world. And something is a little bit expanded. So they're allowed and accepted, but that's not where I want to stop today. Okay? So we're going further out than what we mostly encounter. Because in that way of engaging, of relating to them, the images are not empowered. They're allowed for a moment, looked at, acknowledged, and let go of. They are not empowered. Another common possibility is a person with more sort of psychotherapeutic background says, oh, this is from my past history. This image is somehow representing or constellating something from my past, usually from early childhood or whatever. That's the idea of what it is and what it's doing. Or, again, psychological theory says it's a compensation. I tend not to be strong, so I'm having an image of strength or whatever. The psyche is trying to balance me, and compensate for my lack of something, or whatever other characteristic. Or a person says, these are part of me. They're part of me. They're aspects of me. And that can have a few different ways that could be conceived of. But generally then, they're part of me. My job is somehow to integrate them, to bring them, somehow mix them together in some more consolidated self, or balance them, so that there's not an imbalance in the being, in the self, and to come to some kind of wholeness. What's missing? So I need a bit of that, or I need a bit of that. I'll concentrate on that image to get a bit of that. Integration, balance, or wholeness. And sometimes the integration there actually becomes more, hidden under this word integration, becomes more a sense of there is a sort of chief executive self which gets to choose and keep everything in line and make sure nothing acts up or gets out of hand. It's kind of in charge there. And that's sometimes what the word integration, with the best of intentions, moves towards, unwittingly. And sometimes they're part of me. All these can be mixed, these possibilities. But sometimes we regard them as part of me, as, maybe it's coming up as an image, maybe it's this crazy animal or this dragon or whatever it is. They're just representations. What they really are is factors or elements of mind. So it's coming up an image, but what it really is strength, or courage, or loving kindness, or compassion, or something. So we put them in an abstract concept, an abstract psychological or spiritual concept. You put it in a little box. And again, often then the orientation is to integrating, to balancing, and to moving towards a kind of wholeness. That's the sort of direction of aspiration. And as I said, all those could be mixed, but those are sort of the tendencies. It strikes me as maybe not almost impossible to prove any of that. Almost impossible to prove any of it. They are theories. They are beliefs, theories, psychological theories. People take them as true and real and believe in them, but actually very difficult to prove. And I would again say, in drawing on deep Buddhist insights, I would say that none of them are ultimately true. None of them are ultimately true. Any of that we've just been through. So what then? Can I step back from the usual question of what's right and what's wrong, what's true and what's false, and actually not look in those terms of right, wrong, true, false? And then which way would I look? How would I look? Maybe better to look not in that way, but rather what conceptual framework or what way of looking, of regarding these images, fantasies that exist, what way of looking at them, what concept leads to what? So conceiving of them this way tends to open experience up in this direction and lead to this or that. Conceiving of them in a very different way actually unfolds a whole different sense of the experience and the direction in life. None of them are true. I'd venture to say almost impossible to prove any of that. And so where does that leave us? And maybe it's even a more helpful way of conceiving in the larger sense, to say, well, which way of conceiving leads to what? So that then leaves us with the possibility of experimenting. I can experiment with this. So I'm no longer in this game of what's right, what's wrong, what's true, what's false. Do I dare to experiment? How much do I dare to experiment? And if I'm going to experiment in this realm, mindfulness is necessary. That's my tool. I cannot experiment without sensitivity and mindfulness. And by that I mean particularly a bodily awareness, an awareness of what this feels like and how it changes with different images and emotions and reactions and resonances. The sensitivity and mindfulness to the body and the emotionality. And that's absolutely crucial, because it's that distinguishes all this from daydreaming. When we're daydreaming, there's none of that. We're lost. We're gone. We're not in touch here. So what makes this, we could say, imaginal practice versus daydreaming? It's that, partly. So that with this sensitivity and mindfulness, then I can feel what are the resonances, as I said earlier. What does this stir in me? How do I feel this image and the depth of it and what it resonates in itself and in me? What are the particular emotions, the pathos that it stirs? What's the quality there emotionally? It might be quite complex. What are the energies that it opens in my body that I can feel because of the mindfulness and because of the sensitivity? And what's its particular sense of meaningfulness? And I'll make a distinction between that word meaningfulness and the word meaning. I don't know if this is correct English, but meaning, I've reduced it. It means this. It means courage. It means strength. It means whatever it is. Meaningfulness is something you can't really get to the bottom of. There's a sense of resonance, of meaningfulness. It's more like a poetic image. You can't arrive at the bottom of it. It does not reduce to something else. So all that is included in the mindfulness and the sensitivity if we're making a practice out of this and experimenting. And what if, further, I don't judge immediately the image by its obvious nature? So I might have an image that is very beautiful in a traditional sense, very peaceful, very soft or white or whatever, very conventional in some sense. Or I might get an image that in some way is kind of strange or grotesque or perhaps violent in some way, or a weird kind of pathology in it, or strangely erotic or something. What if I don't judge the image by the content of the image? Because any or all of those, even strange, weird, violent, erotic, whatever, may be right. They may be important for us. So I have to stand back from my immediate inclination to judge it based on a usual framework of what's good, what's bad, what's spiritual, what's not. How can I tell if an image is important for me, if it's right, so to speak? How can I tell? Well, that's why I say use the body, what I call the energy body or the subtle body energy. It's that this field here, I can feel the resonances there. I can feel how the energies move or come into alignment or whatever. Through that awareness, I can discern whether I'm on a right track or a helpful track. No matter what the image, if it's right, I would say, something opens in the energy of the body. Something feels energized. Something actually feels calmed in a strange way, unified and aligned. So the body, the sensitivity to the body, not my typical moral framework, the sensitivity to the body is telling me kind of what's worth pursuing, staying with, exploring. And I will see a few things. If we experiment this, we're going to see a few things undoubtedly. One is that the relationship I have with an image always shapes it and always colours it. So it's not independent of my relationship. You can see this in nightmares. The monster is chasing me in the nightmare, and if for some reason I turn towards it and there's less fear, what happens to the monster usually? It changes. It's not independent of my relationship with it. That's true of nightmares, it's true of this image work, what I'm calling imaginal practice. It's also true of any perception, actually. It's never ever separate from the relationship that I have with it. Even a body sensation of pain, a heartache, whatever it is. Always my relationship is part of it. So I'm going to notice that, and it's important to realize that. But I notice something even more fundamental than that, actually, if I dare to experiment. I start to realize that the view that I have, the way of conceiving that I have, which I may not be conscious of, the view and the way of conceiving make more difference than anything else. Here's this image, and the conception of it that I have is the most, in the end, it's the most powerful thing and the most interesting thing about all this. I could probably sit here all day and tell you the most weird and strange images that I've experienced or people have reported to me. But in the end, it's not the nature of the image so much as the conception of it that is the really interesting and the really sort of fertile aspect of all this. But the view, the way of conceiving, it makes a difference, a huge difference, and it determines a lot of what comes up. And again, you can see this with any experience, any perception or dream experience or imaginal experience. You can see it in the realm of the emotions. How much for, let's say, catharsis, the catharsis of emotions from the past, so-called. When I believe in that, it's a conceptual framework. And that believing in that conceptual framework tends to trigger more of that stuff. When I actually bring some questioning into that, it tends to not generate that process so much. What's going on? It's because it's not an ultimate truth and it's not separate from the mind's conceiving. Okay, so even now, if, or even by this point, if you're listening, and so far from everything you've heard in your life, from Dharma things and read, etc., and all your understanding, if the way of conceiving Dharma is basically learn to calm down a little bit, to relax, calm down, even out a little bit, and learn how to be mindful, to meet something called life, which is taken to be reality in some way. If that's it, calm down, be with experience. If that's what practice is, then probably a lot of what I've said so far, and certainly what I'm about to say, is going to sound completely nuts, just absolute nonsense. Irrelevant. It doesn't make sense. It does not fit in the box, if that's the box. But that was not the Buddha's box necessarily. If the Buddha actually saying not meet life or be with something called that we tend to assume is reality. Saying actually see the emptiness of everything that we take to be real. See the illusory nature of everything we take to be real. And from that seeing comes a much deeper freedom. He doesn't say be with life, meet life over and over again. That's a practice that serves something much deeper. He wants us to see the emptiness of everything. From that comes a deeper feeling. For many people, some of you will just relate to all this imaginary business anyway, but for some people it's that understanding of emptiness that then legitimizes the whole project. Because I'm not cutting off my sense of reality and putting it in the normal modernist box, then I can walk through a door that's actually a lot more open. And I could take the experiment further, in fact a lot further, if I dare. And as I say, I'm not thrusting this in, you can take just as much as feels useful. Now take the experiment further, because reality is not fixed in this way, and because I cannot prove any of these frameworks and theories, and because I understand that the way of conceiving affects what happens, it determines what unfolds. Because of all that, I can take the experiment further, and I can begin to entertain certain ideas, just to see what happens. That word idea, by the way, some of you know, the word idea is it's from a Greek word eidos, E-I-D-O-S, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And it means Greek for idea, but it also implies in the ancient Greek the way we look at things, so that we are always, whether we realize it or not, looking at ourselves and at the world and existence through the lenses of ideas. Most of the time we're not aware of this. But what if we entertain certain ideas, or an eidos, and entertain, maybe these images or these things are more autonomous. Just give them, grant them that they have a bit more autonomy, or a lot more autonomy than I would tend to assume. What if we entertain the idea that they want something? This or that image wants or even demands something of me. T.S. Eliot wrote an essay once called On Poetry and Poets, and he wrote of how one can be oppressed by the burden which he must bring to birth. Something is demanding or asking something of me. And again, if I share from my years ago, this sense that something was coming through, say someone like Jimi Hendrix, something was being asked of him. Or that woman that I shared about earlier whose mother died, and how much she related to this idea that the dead mother was alive and asking something to come through. There's a demand there. So what if we entertain that kind of idea? And what if we entertain the idea of not integrating these things, not subordinating them to this chief executive self, not pressing them together in some kind of balance, wholeness, aspiration of wholeness? What if we don't tame them? We don't try and tame them. What if we seek more to enliven them rather than tame them? What if we seek to enliven them, to enliven their power, to give them their power? Listen to this. There's a wonderful poem by Rilke. It's a long poem, so I'll just read you a little bit of it. He starts the poem, he's looking out the window and he can see a storm approaching and he senses the power of that storm. And then he says, and listen to this in the light of what we're talking about, what we choose to fight is so tiny. What fights with us is so great. If only we would let ourselves be dominated as things do by some immense storm, we would become strong too and not need names. When we win, it's with small things, and the triumph itself makes us small. What is extraordinary and eternal does not want to be bent by us. I mean the angel, he says. What is extraordinary and eternal does not want to be bent by us. I mean the angel. So what if we entertain these different ideas and we see what that opens? What if we do not reduce them to this or that? They're not a result of my past. What if you just entertain the idea that they are not a result of my past? That sacred prostitute, that wasn't anything to do with her past and her upbringing and all that. The voodoo guy that devours the heart with blood all over his hands, nothing to do with her past or with some kind of socio-economic factors or something. Wasn't compensating something in her life. So we're orienting towards opening up in a very different potential here. If I keep them as persons, as figures, as animated, as beings, then although I could say these are qualities, I could give them a psychological concept. When I keep them as persons, they're always bigger than a concept. A person is always bigger than some kind of psychological label, an essential quality or an aspect of being or whatever. Bigger than a symbol in the sense of a sign of something reducing to something. The poet Auden, W.H. Auden, said, "We are lived by powers we pretend to understand." We are lived by powers we pretend to understand. If I dare entertain this kind of way of relating to them, something opens and is undermined in the self-sense. That's where the relationship with the central project of Buddhist practice. Something's undermined and opens in the self-sense. The self is not so prioritized then. With practice and with exploring, I feel that this kind of way of orienting can also mature. It can grow and become more subtle. That's actually its characteristic, is it becomes more subtle, like all practices. So some of you will be familiar with shamanic journeying. Does anyone know that sort of thing? Yeah, a little bit. Or active imagination. Sometimes with those kinds of practices, so a person imagines themselves on a journey through a territory, through a landscape, and encountering on that journey different beings or mythical beings or whatever, and doing this or doing that or having these encounters and moving on, etc. So it's a lovely, lovely form of practice. But I want to make a distinction today, again, just for the sake of where would we not tend to take this kind of stuff. A distinction between narrative image and iconic or poetic image. So narrative image, what I mean by that is something moves through time. So there's a story here and a narrative, and it's unfolding and comes to some resolution. The hero slashes away at the undergrowth, slays the dragon, climbs the castle walls, rescues the princess, and then live happily ever after. It's a resolution. It's a narrative image. If you think about a poetic image in a poem, it just is. It doesn't go anywhere. There's not a story there. It's there's got a quality of eternality to it, and that is partly where it has deeper power. So when I narratively move through a landscape and do all these adventures and stuff and come to some resolution, it can, not has to, but it can reinforce the ego making the journey. And in a way, what we might be interested in actually not that, not so much the ego and the heroic journey, but something else. So, iconic or poetic images have this quality of always to them, forever, eternal. That wanderer I mentioned this morning, he's always wandering. He will never arrive. He is homeless. He will never find a home. It would be wrong to, say, introduce him to a nice woman, to get married, settle down, here's a nice place you can live. Wrong. Not right. The soldier is always doing battle. Always. And if he's not doing battle, he's resting from battle in preparation for the next battle. An eternality of image here. So, in meditation, if you want to, it's not so much a journey, but so much as sitting with this thing and kind of stewing with it, resonating with it. It's static is the wrong word, but it has this, it's not going anywhere or evolving in that sense. And that brings a very different flavour and orientation unfolding to the process itself in the meditation. So, all this, we're saying, I dare to experiment with not reducing it and not integrating and not taming them and all of that, and granting them more autonomy and giving them power. And what happens if I don't literalize them? These are not my parents. I don't concretize this. I don't take it as a symbol, although I can. It symbolizes strength or whatever it is. I don't reduce it to my personal history, and there'll be some, for myself, years, decades of interpreting everything through the psychotherapeutic lens of this I am like I am now because of what happened to me some decades ago in my childhood, whatever, with family and da-da-da-da. Fine, very, very good, but sometimes a person might, after a while, isn't there another way of looking at things? Is that really completely true? Is it at a certain point even interesting anymore as a way of looking? So we get locked into something and it becomes almost unquestionable, taboo to question it. But if I don't do all that, I don't literalize, I don't tame, I don't reduce, I don't say it's a symbol, it equals this, then something as it opens out, it's not contained, there's an infinite depth here, an infinite depth of mystery, something opens beyond the human in the way that we nowadays usually think of what a human being is. There's mystery here, something I would say more religious than humanistic, beyond the purely human. Could go even further, okay, if one wants to experiment. There was a scholar of Islamic mysticism in the 20th century called Henri Corbin, French scholar. And they have a branch of Islamic mysticism quite interested in this sort of stuff, not quite the same, but similar. And he said, it's not your individuation, that word from Jung, if you know, not your individuation that is your task, but the angel's individuation. Not your individuation, but the individuation of the angel, that is your task. So I could conceive of this thing. It's not even about me and my growth and my process and getting it together and being more balanced and all that. And then some things turn around, and the question is not what can I get from this angel, what can it give me, this demon, to balance, to grow, to whatever it is, but what do you want? To the angel, to the demon, what do you want? That becomes the question. And in a way it's a much more powerful question. This is paraphrasing some from James Hillman. It said, we can regard images this way, as highly intentional, as necessary, as presenting a claim, moral, erotic, intellectual, aesthetic, and demanding a response. It is an affecting presence, meaning affecting the heart. The images seem to bear an instinctive direction for a destiny. Such images mean well for us, back us up and urge us on. Understand us more deeply than we understand ourselves. Expand our sensuousness and spirit and love us. This message-bearing experience of the image and the feeling of blessing that an image can bring recalls the Neoplatonic sense of images. Neoplatonism is a very influential sort of thread of philosophy in the Western philosophical tradition, in the Western religions for many centuries. Recalls the Neoplatonic sense of images as daimons, D-A-I-M-O-N-E-S, and angels. And the word angel literally means message bearer. Very different orientation, not viewing these images, these beings as me or even part of me, but what do they want of me and from me? They influence me. They exert their power on me and on my life. They need something. What do they need? They influence my perceptions. They influence my ideas. Back to that word eidos. They have a particular aesthetic style. There's different kinds of beauty associated with different kinds of beings, if you like, different kind of persons. They have their own style of morality or values. Start to conceive or have the possibility of conceiving of existence in a very different way. Is that flying dragon or that soldier or that wanderer that I mentioned, are they mirroring my life? Is it because I have certain experiences that these images arise? Or is it equally, or perhaps even more the case, that my life mirrors those images? That they are more the root of my being, if you like, in a certain sense, and my life expresses that flying dragon, that soldier, that wanderer in different ways. It's the other way around. Maybe it's the other way around. It can be looked at the other way around. And then go even further. What if I might ask, can I serve? Can I serve these persons? Can I see or conceive of the psyche as being bigger than the human? It's not in here somewhere. I am in something bigger. There's James Hillman again talking about this. If we entertain, I'm paraphrasing, if we entertain this kind of framework, this kind of eidos, then he says, then our essentially differing human individuality is really not human at all, but more the gift of an inhuman daemon, D-A-I-M-O-N or D-A-E-M-I, an inhuman daemon who demands human service. Here he echoes Corbin, it is not my individuation, but the daemon's. Not my fate that matters to the gods, but how I care for the psychic persons entrusted to my stewardship during my life. It is not life that matters, but soul, and how life is used to care for the soul. This is a very, very different way of feeling and sensing and perceiving of existence. So, as I say, for me there's something more religious, bigger than the typical humanist way of being. And I feel when I come to my deathbed, if I'm still compos mentis, this is what will matter to me. These are the questions I'll be asked. This is what will really matter. Have I done my duty to these demons or angels that seem to be asking something from me? Plural, asking some things from me. Have I done my duty to that? Have I carried that out? I don't care too much whether I'm comfortable, I have an easeful life, whether people like me or don't like me. Something else is going to be the thing that really, really matters when it comes to it. I don't feel me and my life on that level is actually that important. So there's a possibility of stretching something in quite a different way of orienting to it. And we start to reconsider certain things, possibly. Desire. We tend to think, especially from a Buddhist framework, desire is seeking to increase pleasant sensations or hold on to them and decrease or get rid of unpleasant sensations. And that's why there is desire, right? It's to increase the pleasant, decrease the unpleasant. And desire comes from the self. So it's the self, the ego, that has desire. Maybe that's a simplification, maybe it's oversimplifying something. Maybe some desires, some depths of desires come from the demons and the angels. It's not the middle self, and it's not just about getting what's more pleasant and avoiding the unpleasant. So that woman, I say, can't stop partying. Is it really the case that she's just like that because she's avoiding certain emotions? Is that really what's going on? I don't think, knowing her a little bit, that that's what's going on. Of course, that can sometimes be the case. Something else is going on. Something richer, deeper, in a way more holy than that. Okay, so if you're listening and you might feel, well, this is pretty bonkers, and you might also feel this is pretty dangerous. It seems to feel, I don't know, it's pretty dangerous. So this is important. There's a few things to say about that, the aspect of possible danger. First thing is to say, as a more general thing, and then to get into specifics. First thing is to say that any path, any technique, any practice, desire is for maximizing the pleasant, maximizing pleasant sensation and minimizing unpleasant sensation. And that comes from self-interest. So there is a self which wants to maximize pleasure and minimize unpleasant. Now, that's a very helpful way of looking at things. It's a helpful framework, and you can take that a long way. But it's a simplification. And I just wonder, is it really the fullness of what's going on? Or is it sometimes that desire comes from the angel, comes from the demon? Not even mine. It wants something. So this woman who is listened to so much dharma and blah blah blah, and yet can't seem to stop the partying and that, this and that I was telling you earlier. Is it really that she can't handle her emotions and it's kind of avoidance behavior? Maybe in some cases, or to an extent. Or is something else coming through? Some other god, if you like, is calling her, is moving her. Maybe Dionysus, the god of ecstasy, craziness, fragmentation. Is it really that she's just seeking to maximize pleasure and avoid the unpleasant emotions that she can't handle? Alright, so as I said, leaning towards what's not very common in the way that we typically think, unless it's quite far out what I'm describing or what I'm suggesting as a possible way of looking at all this. And you might feel a little bit uncomfortable. So this sounds dangerous to me, what you're suggesting. It sounds a little on the edge of perhaps nuts. So let's say a few things as kind of caveats or being a little careful. One is, and I'll repeat this, we're not talking about belief. We're not talking about something to believe, some objective truth that you can prove in a scientific experiment or something. We're talking about something, we're talking about a mythical, entertaining a mythical sensibility. We're talking about a way of looking, entertaining a way of looking, an idea that leads and opens up in a certain direction, or opens up certain things. Will it make you happy? Well, yeah, some of this there will be a lot of happiness, but not always. That soldier is not particularly happy. That wanderer, it's not particularly, it's got a kind of, but not really. Will it make you free? Will it lead to freedom? Yeah, at a radical level, deeper probably than even the conception of freedom that you might be entertaining. There's a whole other level of freedom available here. We hadn't even realized that it was available. But even then, it's not so simple. You guys okay? Getting tired? It's okay to say a bit more? There's a radical freedom available here, but it's not that simple. Because if I say, there is this duty, or there is this burden, or I feel like there's this beautiful duty and this serving, it's not quite 100% free, is it? I've got this duty. So yes, happiness, sort of sometimes, not others. Yes, a certain kind of freedom at a very deep level, but not in the total way that we might have imagined. Maybe introduce a word that's really gone out of style, soulfulness. What might this bring is a dimension of feeling and awareness into the existence we might call soulful. There's something about the resonances, the meaningfulnesses, the depth, the richness, the beauty, the different kinds of beauty that one can feel there. And there's a possibility that one senses one's life and one's death in very different ways. Very different ways. Some styles of practice, it's almost like they can become a bit one-dimensional. And here's the possibility of opening up other dimensions, a sensibility to other dimensions of existence. Maybe a better word than happiness is fulfillment. If something feels right because something is knocking on my door and pulling me and pushing me, and something is fulfilled through following that. And Socrates apparently said, this is from Norman Brown, he says, "Our greatest blessings," says Socrates in the Phaedrus, "come to us by way of madness, provided," he adds, "that the madness comes from the God. Our real choice is between holy and unholy madness." And for some, our greatest blessings, says Socrates in the Phaedrus, come to us by way of madness, provided, he adds, that the madness comes from the God. Our real choice is between holy and unholy madness. And some people, and maybe even some people listening today, or I know some people here from experience, actually feel, if you use a certain language, a calling in this direction, to explore in this way, to entertain this kind of ideation. There's, if you like, to use a certain language, a soul necessity. It feels necessary to go in this way. Maybe not at the exclusion of others, but this feels important. Now I can use that word soul without ever meaning an entity or some solid thing or anything like that. I use it more as a way of looking. There's a way of looking that unfolds soulfulness, that unfolds this resonance and meaningfulness of depth and kinds of beauty and other perspectives on existence. So soul, if you like, is a way of looking. And I can use that word just as I use the word, or we use the word self. We know it's empty, but we can use that and it's helpful. Or I can use the inner critic idea. We know it's not real, but it's helpful as a concept. Or the words angel, demon. Again, I know they're empty, but they can be really helpful. Or I can talk and see in those terms, and that unfolds something that might not unfold or open from another perspective, another way of looking. Okay, so that was caution, or caveat number one, is really we're not talking about belief here. We're talking mythically about entertaining ideas. Second thing, and again, and you might feel, well, what about ethics here? You know, if you've got some crazy person there or very violent, won't you act out? Isn't there a danger of acting these crazy things out? What about suicide bombers? Don't they think in this kind of way and that sort of thing? Again, I repeat what I said this morning, knowing image as image. Knowing image as image. But adding to that, again, what I said this morning is that images exist for us even when we don't realize. So when I say know image as image, I particularly mean be aware of images that we don't even recognize are images. When people declare holy war on other people, and those other people declare a holy war back on those other people, are they not all completely entranced by certain mythology and images? A war against evil, or blah, blah, blah. It's an image, it's a mythos that they're failing to see is exactly that, is a mythos, is an image. Not knowing image as image. That's where the danger comes. Not in the image of warrior, or even in the image of holy war. The danger is in the literalism and in the blindness to seeing image as image. And as I said, when I do see image as image, then it empowers these things and also disempowers them. Empowers them helpfully, disempowers what's unhelpful or dangerously unconscious there. And sometimes, working in this way, one might feel that something is being asked that needs expression in the world. I need to say something. I need to communicate or manifest something in a certain way. It could be vocally, it could be artistically, it could be in the style of the way I do something. Something needs to manifest. And other times, nothing needs to manifest on a material level. But I need to honor something. I need to listen and feel the beauty in something. So there's also that question. what needs acting and what doesn't need acting, what just needs honouring, needs feeling into the different beauties that are offered there, the soulfulness there. Again, talking about cautions, sometimes people talk to me using this language, and I feel uncomfortable because some things, it's almost like they're taking it too literally and taking the self in the middle of it all. They believe too much in themselves. The person says, this healing chieftain appeared to me and he blessed me with the power to heal other beings and blah, 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 and there was this imaginal ritual. And then they feel themselves like they're taking it way too literally, and it all sounds so stiff and a little bit pompous. There's too much self there, and it makes other people nervous. He starts talking about this and people, yeah, great. It's too much self, too much solidity, too much literalism, and too much concretization. But we need a lot of sensitivity here. So what's discerning between what is a movement of ego, or, this word papancha, do you know this word? Ego proliferation, the vortex, the spinning of craziness that we get into sometimes. What's all that, and what is the calling, let's say, of the demon? Or, and to use John Keats, the poet, his phrase, what is soul-making as something different from ego and papancha? Sometimes it's not so easy to tell the difference. So again, back to the body, the sensitivity, the emotional resonances. Papancha and ego tends to stay pretty petty. It feels petty, it feels cheap. It tends to just loop in small circles around and around. Whereas the other stuff, we feel the body, it tends to open something, even if it looks weird as an image, it tends to open up the body, the heart, the body, there's an alignment, there's an energization, expansion, as I was saying before. The delicacy of attention, discrimination, sensitivity. Sometimes right in the middle of what we call papancha, that kind of craziness that feels so much like ego, there's something, let's say, holy, that wants to come through. And it's partly staying stuck in the small loop because I'm not seeing the holiness in it. And that's what's keeping it stuck in the small loop. And it stays as papancha, and it needs a different relationship, and then it can open up. But I sometimes wonder whether this whole question is like, especially in these circles and also modern culture, we tend very easily to label something in ourselves or in another when we say, oh, that's ego. That's ego. And very easy to say, oh, that's ego. What does it mean? What does it mean? So, Hendricks again. He wrote these letters when he was young and he was just still learning his trade, and he went out on the road with different bands, and he was gone from home for months and months touring. And he would write back cards, I forget to who, to his brother or his father, or I can't remember, or friend. And they, a lot of them would sound very boasting. So I play the blues like you've never heard now. I'm getting so good, you won't believe. I've cut everybody. I said, that sounds like ego, is it? Well, did you see that film? Did anyone see that film, Senna? The film about the racing driver. I was completely uninterested in Formula One. I'm still not that interested in it, but I went to see this film. It's very easy. Why does this guy want to be number one world champion? It's just ego. Drive a fast car, get the babes, da-da-da, etc. It's like, it's so easy to fit that in the box of just immature ego and the competition and everything. Is it really? Is it really? Is that all it is? Or is something else coming through? And does that other thing have a kind of beauty to it? A kind of necessity? A kind of divinity, even? Or you see someone and they're dressed a certain way, this way or that, and they're just looking for attention. Or they just want sexual attention. It's just ego. Is that really? I mean, in some cases maybe, or maybe it's a proportion, but is that all of what's going on? Something else wanting to manifest, wanting to come through. Some other god or goddess, if we use that language. You see this everywhere. In Buddhist history is rich with so much polemic and invective. And invective, is that right? An argument between people. So Chandrakirti was an extremely important teacher in the Mahayana, and he writes in his commentaries on this teacher that was a little earlier called Bhaviveka. And he's just, to use colloquial language, slagging him off endlessly in these texts. And he's making one mistake after another. He's a nincompoop, whatever Sanskrit for nincompoop is. it's all over the place in these teachers saying that these fools don't know what to talk. Only I know. You're lucky that I'm around as a teacher. And, broadcasting this in texts that then get reprinted. You think, what's going on? Picasso, in an interview, they ask him about Matisse, and he goes, Matisse, it's just a splash of red on the canvas. You think, what a nasty man, it's all ego. Tibetan and Indian polemics in the Buddhist tradition, there's so much polemic there. Even the Buddha, you may know this story, very, very shortly after his enlightenment, the first person he met said, wow, you look amazing. Who's your teacher? And he said, having fully known on my own, to whom should I point as my teacher? I have no teacher, and one like me cannot be found. In the world with its devas, even with its angels, I have no counterpart. I am an arahant. One translation of that is a defeater of all. I have defeated all. I am the unexcelled teacher. And this guy just says, yeah, sure. and goes on his way. And he says, well, can't be ego if it's the Buddha. Maybe it is. Maybe awakening is all a load of rubbish. Or are we just looking at the whole thing in the wrong way? There's a beautiful myth from ancient Egypt, Horus, the myth of Horus, if you know. He's born from his mother Isis, and she realizes as he's being born, this is a falcon coming now. She said, make way, it's a falcon. He shoots out, and the first thing he does is flies. And he flies a greater distance. He flies way out of the solar system, and he says, I've gone further than all of the gods of old. No god compares. I'm unique in my flight. And then there's for me, a very touching myth that follows. There's something in the archetype of that. Looks like ego, maybe it isn't. Maybe it isn't. Maybe there's something even beautiful in what we quickly label ego in all these different examples. So, again, are we oversimplifying this whole question of self? It's either ego or it's compassion, as if there's nothing else. Is the whole notion of ego and self oversimplified? And when we talk about repression, I can repress stuff from my past, but maybe I can also repress, if you like, an angel or a demon that might be coming up. That might be repressed too. Okay, so maybe, I'm not sure, I want to end now, but I'm not sure if this kind of way I'm leaning, and again it's only one possibility, but if this kind of way that I've emphasized today, because it's unusual and because I find it more interesting, if that needs a certain depth of freedom already to even go near, if you need to have let go of a lot of the more stuff, maybe that's the case, but not always. So this is going to be different with different individuals. But some people, as I said, will be called to this way of looking and these kind of ideas, even before they have any deep freedom and let go of a lot of stuff. There's something necessary, and it's part of their way of working out a freedom. So it's different. It's different. But I would say that there's the real possibility that this way of engaging actually brings freedom, a radical freedom. As I said earlier, a freedom even at a level that we wouldn't even have realized existed as a level of freedom. A whole different kind of freedom is possible out of this. A whole different kind, a whole other level of freedom. One part of that freedom, one small part, is because we have, as I said, images are everywhere, and we have, whether we realize it or not, we have images and fantasies of what awakening is and what it looks like. We have images and fantasies operating in us, given to us by the culture, of what freedom is and looks like. And then they have their power, and if something that I'm doing doesn't fit, it feels like it's not okay. Do you understand what I'm saying? We limit the range of what is holy or beautiful or divine or awakened or whatever it is. It's kind of given to us by images. It's informed by images. But there are also other kinds of holiness, other kinds of divinity. There are, to use a certain language, there are other gods and other archetypes. Not only the kind of Christian archetype of divinity or holiness, or only the Buddhist archetype of holiness and freedom and divinity. Sober, equanimous, calm, chaste. It's a Buddhist image. It's a Buddhist spin on what awakening looks like. It's one of the main Buddhist spins. That word daimon, D-A-I-M-O-N or D-A-E-M-O-N, historically in the West what happened was that there were lots of those. There were lots of gods and lots of daimons, daimones. And then the Christian Revolution happened, and a monotheistic culture took birth, and everything that didn't fit into that god became, all the other daimons became demons. Demons, D-E-M-O-N, devils, and got equated, lumped with Satan, darkness, evil. Do you see what I mean? Yeah? There was a shrinking of the range. So, for example, Aphrodite's temples became labelled satanic worship temples. It was all lumped together. Failure to see the beauty, the divinity in something else. So that happened in Christianity. Does it not go on also in Buddha Dharma? Is it not the same? Something has shrunk. So, as I said, there's lots of loose ends and questions and implications here. One really goes into it. One of the things I want to say as well is that if you get into this, you start to realize, as I've said several times today, our world, our lives are alive with images anyway, with imagination and fantasy. It imbues our existence, especially where we have a sense of meaningfulness and resonance. That's when image is alive for us. Myth is very alive for us. Wherever there's a sense of meaningfulness, of being moved or resonant with something, image and fantasy are alive. Can I wake up to that? Can I see that and start exploring it? Do I dare? Admitting that and seeing, what does it mean? What's its implications? Entertaining that eidos, as I said. There's a possibility, if one does, there's a possibility that it opens up to, as I said, a whole other level of freedom, and a whole other way of conceiving and sensing existence. A very different sense of existence. Possible. Shall we have a quiet minute together?